Oh, man. Guys, I rushed in here because I heard you were having trouble. Guys, check out this video and see if it helps, okay? Let me tell you something. I'm on this thing 24/7 for you. So let me know if it works, all right? And then come find me. I'm out of here.
Guys, the 1920s. Yes, it's all about the Charleston. No, there's a lot of things the 1920s are all about. And I am here to tell you about it today. Guys, get ready for the test, because here we go. And Charleston is just part of that. This dance was popularized at the time, and you can tell that these flappers, that's these ladies that with more liberal ideas, less conservative. This would be a popular dance at the time. So real quick, I'm going to switch over to our Culture Wars main. We're going to look at that really quick. And what I'd like us to do is to focus on these ideals right here. The Culture Wars, the social changes of the 1920s. Liberal versus conservative, wet versus dry, prohibition, immigration versus nativism. We're going to look at the Sacco and Vanzetti trial, urban versus rural, the movement of people from urban environment. For the first time, people lived more in urban areas than in rural areas. So a movement from urban to rural. The culture clash, the Great Migration, black versus white issues that existed at the times. And of course, the new woman, this idea that women are not going to be typecast into an old traditional mold. They're going to start to express themselves. Also, science versus religion will be taken into consideration with the Scopes monkey trial and the battle between science and religion. So real quick, let's go ahead and start. Now, as I'm looking at the test, guys, remember the first place you need to go for everything that you need is right here. I'm going to go ahead and open up our main screen. Guys, please check out the unit. Go into the unit. Use the resources that we have available. Remember that that everything starts here. Check through your notes. Check through the packet. Go down to the bottom. And go through the Quizlet. Okay, so here's the Quizlet link, and you just click on that puppy right there, and bang, there's all the words that we're going to be testing right there. Okay, we're going to be looking at that stuff right in the Roaring Twenties unit. Guys, I'm not going to stray very far from it, so stay in there. So looking at the test really quick, I'm just going to go through what you're going to need to basically know. Based upon these words behind me. Yes, the Roaring Twenties. All right. So right away in the test that I've printed out, it looks at the battle between conservatives and liberal thinkers. This battle between people that looked at more traditional ways, okay, the conservatives, versus liberals who basically looked at things from a standpoint of change, okay? And that's up here right at the very beginning. Also, the rural to urban migration. People basically, especially African Americans, that were subjugated in a way where their lifestyle was totally controlled. Sharecroppers basically had very little option, and many times there was very little sharing in sharecropping. And of course, the Jim Crow laws that kept them down. It kept basically the Old South basically booming, and people finally just moving away from from that type of a living arrangement to a place where jobs are starting to become more plentiful. Probably the biggest jump in jobs was the war, the World War One. There were industries where they were needed. So African Americans would move away from things that were less pleasant to places that were more pleasant. So I'm going to go ahead to the culture wars main. We're going to go ahead there. I'm going to turn off my display capture really quick, but please check those things. So coming back, there's a part of that social change is this idea that some people don't like government, and one of the ideas I talked about was this idea of anarchy. An anarchist is simply a person that just does not want any government. They're just totally against government. So anarchy is covered on the test. An anarchist is a person that rebels against any kind of government or organization, government organization. One of the other issues that I don't have, that I'm not covering with a photo, is this idea of this new culture, of this new cashless culture, where people are now embracing the buy now, pay later kind of lifestyle, or what's called installment buying. I am going to move over to, let's see. So probably one of the places that expresses, I guess, this urban change, this urban to rural change, is it was the Harlem Renaissance. So I'm going to pop over here, and I'm going to pop that off. Let's go here. And the Harlem Renaissance was one of those periods where a culture, the black culture, was starting to ingrain itself into urban life, and people moved to places that were like them. So, for example, Italians moved into Italian neighborhoods, Irish people moved into Irish primary neighborhoods, and African Americans also found comfort in neighborhoods that primarily was based in African American life. Well, one of the things I showed you guys, we looked at the Cotton Club. We looked at many artists that exemplified this Roaring '20s culture of music, horn playing, big band sound, just like like in the introduction. So the Harlem Renaissance was significant in that, and Harlem, remember, was in New York City. There are several topics that are covered in vocabulary words. The words xenophobia, urbanization, bootlegger, corruption, and fundamentalism. So I'm going to kind of hit those one after the other here, and I'm going to jump down to this man right here, probably one of the most infamous bootleggers in the history of America, Al Capone. We talked a little bit about Al Capone and bootlegging and the corruption that went along with bootlegging. Remember, corruption with the police, corruption in government, and of course, everything being corrupted by the big almighty dollar. So bootleggers and corruption, and of course, this idea of urbanization, people moving from the country to the city, and the changes that result as inside of the bootlegging culture, you had a battle between the wets and the dries. There we go. We want beer, and these ladies over here saying, no, lips that touch liquor will never touch ours. This is that idea that would spawn something called prohibition, and prohibition was the result of the majority of the dries winning out in the battle for the Congress, which would later be overturned. But this was the 18th Amendment, or the Prohibition Amendment. So that's covered in the 1920s. I think I covered that. I'm going to come back to fundamentalism in just a second. We also looked at groups of people that flourished during this time. I'm going to pop down here a little bit. This group over here, so that grew during that time. I'm gonna go ahead and flip those guys on here, and the KKK. This is actually a KKK rally in Washington, D.C., and you can see the massive numbers of Ku Klux Klan members. There's a lot of discussion as to why that group flourished so much in the 20s. I'm guessing people had a little to think about other than, I guess you're looking at the clash of religions going on, the clash of the black culture that is now starting to gain a foothold and primary white culture, and the rebellion that happened early on. This gives you an example of the amount of racism that still existed in America. There were over 4 million members of the KKK at its height. If you remember the video clip we watched on the KKK and how they appealed to what they call salt of the earth Americans right there, using the flag, using religion to make them sound mainstream. Okay. I talked about the 18th Amendment, going back to the wet versus dry. I just want to hustle right back there and kick out the KKK for a second. These places where illegal consumption of alcohol basically was done were called speakeasies. And an example of one of those speakeasies I talked about was the Cotton Club in New York City, in Harlem. Yes. Okay. The 1920s also was kind of was a birth of something called the Red Scare. People were afraid of a lot of things. Xenophobia was running rampant. People were afraid of the communists. And remember, at the end of World War I, the communists take over Russia. They kick out the Tsar of Russia, and the possibility of it happening in the United States was possible. It almost happened in Germany after the war. So there was this Red Scare. Also, of course, the anarchists, people that were anti-government. So these were things that happened as a result of the fear, basically, the fear-mongering that was existing in America at that time. Of course, people were afraid of everything, including the dreaded immigrants. Okay, and I'm going to pop down to the immigrant page. That there was a culture war in America, and that culture war pitted basically religious folks against, which actually I guess you could call the more conservative part of America, with the people that were more liberal and more looking for other ways of explaining the world, the liberal side. And the event that happens that kind of allows this discussion to come out, something called the Scopes monkey trial. And I'm going to go down to this fundamentalism example, and I've got to go ahead and cut out my main culture wars here. This is actually a photograph of the outside of the trial, and it basically talks about this is the Anti-Evolution League, basically the conflict, hell in the high school that this was going to kill religious folks. They were going to be taught that monkeys were the idea of evolution, that human beings were evolved from monkeys. Oh my gosh, that scared people so much. Remember, everybody was afraid. There was a lot of fear mongering going on, and that was just part of that fear mongering. The last little bit I want to talk about, and I want to find these guys here. And the last little bit that I want to add is this fear that comes about in the trial of Sacco and Vanzetti. And we talked a little bit about that in class. And I'm going to actually go ahead and basically bring up an image of Sacco and Vanzetti. And Sacco and Vanzetti were American immigrants. And I'm going to go ahead and pull that up in my display capture right here. And Sacco and Vanzetti were accused of murder. And of course, the trial gets into other things other than murder. Let me get this Roaring 20s intro off there. So Sacco and Vanzetti were Italian American immigrants, and they get accused of murder. Now the murder basically story, is part of it. The other one is the evidence against them. The issue of people just being afraid of them because they're Italian, and they're immigrants. They are first generation immigrants. But both of them have, both of them have the same rights as other Americans. So it really gets into a lot of those themes. Another theme that came out was one of them had hung around with anarchists. So you got that fear going on. There was a bombing that had occurred that created a lot of fear. And there was a lot of mystery as to, Bartolomeo Vanzetti. So anyway, so these guys basically get embroiled in a trial that gets down to basically, are they guilty or are they not guilty? And the evidence being looked at is actually pretty soundly conflicted. So what it gets down to is, first of all, should both of them be put on trial at the same time, which they were, even though they both individually have rights in the country. And because they're Italian, they basically are pushed together in this trial. One seems to be more guilty than the other, but nonetheless, the trial goes on. Both of them are treated the same, and evidence against one or evidence for the one or the other, guilt or innocence, is basically placed in a single pot. So that's pretty much it. I think I hit everything. I hit everything that's on the test. Bootlegging. I got I've got the trial of Sacco and Vanzetti, the xenophobia that goes on as a result of this fear of immigration, the Red Scare. We covered that. Wet versus dry, 18th Amendment. We talked about prohibition. We discussed the issue of corruption in America, fundamentalist beliefs, the Bible versus science, the bootleggers basically taking advantage of the 18th Amendment to enrich themselves, urbanization, the movement of people from rural areas to urban areas, the growth of cities, xenophobia, we talked about that. This idea of intolerance in America also, that we were a little less tolerant to change, and that is part of that conservative value system in America. The buy now, pay later mentality, this installment buying culture, and that is it, guys. Guys, this test is easy. I want you guys to understand that. Let's not get freaked out about it. I'm going back to the beginning. And one of the first things I want you to understand right now is that, guys, this is not an end-all to end-all. You will do awesome on this test. Go ahead and open this thing up right here. So, guys, use the tools available to you, okay? Get online, okay? Go to, yes, Quizlet. Bam, click on Quizlet. Find the test that we're covering, okay? Go down here, find the 1920s. There it is. Roaring 20s. Bam, there's another way of getting there. And go through the terms. Guys, that is what I'm testing right there, guys. It's not rocket science. It's easy, all right? And please enjoy this stuff while it's fresh in your mind. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and put down some 1920s jazz music for us to leave on. And guys, please enjoy. And yes, it's all easy.